So before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the various lands on which we meet today. I'm in Gadigal land in Sydney, and acknowledge the many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting. I do pay my respects to elders past and present, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and the waters of Australia. Then I'd like to jump into some housekeeping. We have today in this meeting myself, Susie. I know some of you. I am the Systemic Advocacy and Social Impact Manager at SCIA, which means I look oversee advocacy and a range of other projects as well. And many of you have met me in a variety of different forums. We also have Liala, who you have probably met, who looks after our emergency preparedness project and supports our representative advocacy as well, with Gordana, who is our representative advocacy person who does a wonderful job communicating to all you guys and setting up these meetings, and two students who help us, especially with the tech, because we get confused easily. So thank you very much, Carlos and Celia, for joining us. Now, just stuff you guys already know. When you ask a question, please try to raise the little yellow hand if you can. We'll try and have only one person speaking at a time so everyone can hear, and so our minute takers can record. If you are not speaking, and I think everyone knows this now, just keep your microphone on mute because of that background noise that we have in our meetings sometimes. And we're recording the meeting today so that we can share it with people who aren't able to join and people who want to watch it again. We're also doing a transcript. So if you don't want your faces shown or you don't want your voice heard, you can use the chat function and you can turn off your camera. But otherwise, we look forward to everyone participating today. Before we go into the meaty items that we want to talk about today, we just wanted to share a little bit of an update with you all about the direction that advocacy is taking. So those of you who've been around in the advocacy space will probably remember that in 2021, we did a whole lot of research about what everyone's advocacy priorities were, what you really wanted us to focus on. And that we did focus on, but we probably didn't put it front and center. So we've gone back and we've had a look at that work that many of you helped us with back in 2021. And sadly, a lot of it is still very relevant today. So we're going to bring back the idea of priority areas because that really allows us to have front and center, this is what is really important to us at Spinal Cord Injuries Australia. And those priority areas come out of the work that was done in 2021. And I think you'll probably agree with it, but the report is on the website if you'd like to look at it. They are over 65 equity issues for people who are over 65. The NDIS reforms, that wasn't in the 2021 because we were waiting for the NDIS review and the Disability Royal Commission, but lo and behold, we're at the other end of it now and there's a lot to keep on top of. Housing, the service provider survey follow-up. Gordana is going to share with you, many of you contributed to our service provider survey, and Gordana is going to share with you what the outcomes were from that. And we can't just do a survey and not follow up. So we want to be speaking up about the issues that we've highlighted there. Transport and assistive technology. So they're the key areas we want to focus on in 2024. We'll be putting out information on them, and that will allow us in the long term with you guys to have resources where you can do the advocacy, where you can go to your local MPs, because we'll have policy briefings on each of those areas. So that's our sort of vision for 2024. And we will have our amazing representative advocacy advisory group to help us with that. And we will talk a little bit about that too. as a bit of an update, because it's so important that we feed back. Oops, sorry. Don't mind me. Just trying to make my computer work and it's not. I wanted to let you know what we've submitted, what submissions we've done since last time we met. We've sent a submission to the consultation paper 2 for the aged care exposure draft. It's on our website if you'd like to read it. We have provided feedback on the registration of providers for DANA, for the Disability Advocacy Network's NDIS review findings. We're currently, in fact, we've more or less done it, are working on a submission to give feedback to the NDIS amendment bill, getting the NDIS back on track, which is a really hard read. And there are some good components, but there are some things that we think need some further looking at, and we'll be making that submission soon and then putting it on our website as well. We're also working on an SCIA submission to the NDIS Provider and Worker Registration Task Force about the issue of service providers and support workers. So importantly, some of the things you'll see when Gordana starts presenting about the service provider survey is how important self-management is to a lot of our people. And so the issue of NDIS registration is really relevant. It needs to have a really careful thought put into it. We need registration to protect people. We also need flexibility for people who self-manage. So we will be using your feedback and we will be using other information like the service provider survey to put a submission in to that task force. If you do self-manage, I think Gordana's already sent you the information. We encourage you to also look at that and maybe put a submission in because it is very important to a lot of you guys, we know. In terms of workshops, we're running another person-centered emergency preparedness workshop on the 16th and the 23rd of May. If you haven't completed the training, it's an opportunity to participate in the workshop and to receive one-on-one support for developing your own person-centered emergency preparedness plan. And really, it's about getting us sort of think about, are we ready in an emergency? Especially people who live near the bush or people who live in flood zones. It's a free service. SCIA has received funding to do it. Liala runs it with people. We also have people talking about their lived experience. Liala brings her beautiful Italian accent to the to the training, so I just like attending it to listen to her to speak. But there's also a lot of really valuable information just to, what would I do without power, for example, that is conveyed in those workshops. So if you haven't done it, it's free. Sign up, come along, and we'll be running that in next month. So the last update I wanted to provide you with is the Representative Advocacy Advisory Group. We've now written our terms of reference. We've got approval from our board to develop the Representative Advocacy Advisory Group, which is you guys helping us work on our priority areas, helping us understand the most important things to you, and then also sharing your lived experience examples for our submissions, because it's something that we've done always, but we haven't had a structure to make sure we're hearing everybody's voices as well as we could. So this Representative Advocacy Advisory Group will give us that structure to have you guys contribute to our advocacy priority areas, to have us share the information back with you, and you can share it in your local areas. And also it will start that journey of equipping everybody to do local advocacy as well. We will be advertising for that in the next 2 weeks. We'll share it with you guys. Gordana started communicating with everyone a little bit more regularly, which hopefully everybody is appreciating. They're voluntary positions. It's not a huge time commitment. If you're interested, once you get the email, have a look at the documents and the position descriptions, and please apply. So that's sort of the updates. We really want to make this group and through the Advocacy Advisory Group as dynamic as possible. It shouldn't just be us writing submissions. We want your help. You guys know you're living it every day. So that's that's that little update. So today we're going to, from here, now that I've given my update, we're going to firstly have an update from Gordana about the service provider survey. What everyone said, were their experiences working, well, having service providers, where the gaps were, what was working, what wasn't working. And Gordana will take you through that. And then I think in a first for an advocacy forum, we're going to do a breakout room. So we're going to divide you, or I think everyone's already said what rooms they want to go to. We're going to divide into room 1, which just stays here, the reviewing the NDIS review findings, as well as a bit of an overview about this new bill. I had to print it to read it. I felt very bad for the trees. So there's a lot to unpack in that bill. We're going to talk about some of the review findings, what are navigators, NDIS access and eligibility. We're also going to talk about some of the components of the legislation that maybe we should look a little bit more closely at. Then, for the people that want to come with me, we will be doing breakout room number 2, where we'll go into a separate room and we'll talk about the aged care gaps. So what we know to date about the aged care review and what's happening, the support at home, what we know the legislation's been delayed, but what do we know about the how we will be supported at home? And then we'll also be learning from you guys, because I'm going to be, at the end of this week, starting our policy briefing on aged care and the over 65 inequities. And I really want to hear from you about your experiences so we can start this advocacy campaign. It's been a long-standing issue. It affects a lot of people. It's not equitable, and we want to keep speaking up on it. So those people coming to room 2 with me, that's what we will be doing. So that you don't have to hear any more of my voice, I will hand over to Gordana, who will take you through the survey. And big thanks to everyone who completed that survey, because that's like that rich data. I've already referenced it, even though we haven't released it yet. Referenced it in my submission on the NDIS legislation. So it's really great to have that data. All right, I will stop sharing, Gordana, and you can start sharing. You have?
I have.
How did you
I
do
took
that?
control.
You are so technical. I'm really impressed. All right, go.
All right. So I'm going to talk about the service provider feedback. And yes, you will be hearing my voice a lot, unfortunately. Okay. SCIA undertook this survey because of the feedback that we received from members about their experiences with service providers. So on the 10th of May last year, one of the topics that we discussed at the Representative Advocacy online forum was this topic. And then we sent the survey fairly much after we discussed the topic as well. So the survey was sparked by a member who wrote to SCIA's CEO about her experiences with service providers and her experience working in the sector. The objective of the survey was to actively engage members, people with spinal cord injury and neurological conditions, their families and carers, to better understand the barriers and challenges people with disability experience when accessing care from aged care and the disability service providers. So the survey was actually sent to over 3,000 people, of which 8,000 are people with disability. 68 people completed the online survey, with 53 identifying as people with disability and 16 as carers, guardians, or family members of a person with a disability. Some respondents identified that they were a person with a disability as well as a carer. Okay, so this is some interesting demographics for you. So we had a gender split. We had 57 respondents identified as female and 42 as male. As you can see, the age range, 56% were over 55, and you can see the rest of the age group as well. Geographical location, 49 lived in metropolitan areas and 59 in metropolitan areas and 41 in regional and rural areas. And this is the state by state breakdown. So we had 66% living in New South Wales, 11% in Victoria, and 20% amazingly evenly split between South Australia, ACT, Queensland, and Western Australia. Okay. So this section is about support funding, management of support funding, and the access to disability support. So respondents were asked about the type of funding they accessed. 54 stated that they accessed supports through the NDIS. 23 respondents said that they received their supports through other means, like the Department of Veteran Affairs, My Aged Care, iCare equivalent services, or they funded their own supports, or they funded their supports out of other options, like it might be their pensions or something like that. There was some crossover in accessing funding for disability support needs, with 77 responses provided from 68 respondents. What this means is that, say, for example, if you're an aged care person, you may have dipped into your super or things like that to actually pay for your aged care, that type of thing. Or if you're yeah, so that's probably the example that I could think of at the moment. When we asked respondents how people access their disability supports, we got 104 responses indicating that people with disabilities access more than one service provider type to meet their support needs. 52 people told us that they accessed support through a disability service provider, 28 from sole traders, and 17 from platform or intermediary providers, and 6 from other providers and 1 from an aged care provider. Okay. So this is the overall rating, which was really surprising because it's for me, it's actually quite low. The survey results show that respondents on average rated their overall experience with accessing support through service providers at 5.6 out of 10, with significant issues relating to staffing across both the aged care and disability sectors. What was encouraging to see is that respondents express feeling comfortable about providing feedback to their service providers. However, only 50% stated, let me just admit someone, sorry, only 50% stated that they had filed a complaint. And a further 50% stated that they have never filed a complaint to a service provider. 31% of the 39 respondents who actually provided feedback identified that they were not happy with the outcome of their complaints, stating that providers did not act on their complaints, and when they did, nothing changed. Respondents also stated that they did not. Oh, sorry, I've just lost the feed.
Dana, no worries. I will take care of admitting people.
I've just lost the feed, so I just have to go. I have to stop sharing and I have to just. I'm just getting the feedback up again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me just get to the right place. It's been very stubborn, very slow. Okay, almost there, guys. Yeah, okay. Yeah, respondents stated that they did not make formal complaints because they worried about negative repercussions that could impact on their service provision. Other respondents stated that they had negative experiences when complaining in the past, and others felt that they did not have a trusting relationship with their service providers and the staff. When respondents were asked if they experienced challenges when connecting with disability service provider, 64% of you stated that you did. Okay, this graph is about paid hours. So you can see this was actually quite surprising to me, but then I remember that I worked in attendant care. We only provided care for people who needed more than 15 hours of support. So according to this, 47% of respondents said that they received under 20 hours of paid support per week. 25 stated that they received 20 to 40 hours, and a further 9% stated that they needed more than 40 hours of paid support a week. This is about registration. Once again, interesting statistics. When people were asked if their service provider was registered, 31 people told us that they used registered providers. 18 stated that they used both registered and unregistered providers, and 7 respondents told us that they only used unregistered providers. When asked if registration was important to them, 30 people responded to say that it was. However, A further 32 respondents with an even 50-50 split stated that registration was not important to them and that they did not mind either way. Okay, so this is about missed supports, and this was another surprising statistic for me and quite alarming as well for me. Respondents identified that the quality and availability of staff was a major concern. This issue also resonates with previous finding in SCIA's Policy and Advocacy Engagement Project in 2021. One major concern identified included staff not turning up to shifts, with 22% of respondents reporting that they missed scheduled supports more than 10 plus times in a 12-month period, placing the responsibility onto their informal supports to fill these gaps. We think that, I personally believe that this is unacceptable and very concerning, considering the complex support needs of people with spinal cord injuries and neurological conditions. Okay, so staffing shortages. Staffing shortages and service providers not being able to replace staff when shifts are cancelled, leaving people with disability without care if a shift cannot be covered, is a real problem faced by many people with complex physical disability. Service provider shift cancellations policies are an area that many of you responded to, either saying that you weren't satisfied with them or you were very dissatisfied with the way that they were handling that. Staff shortages across the aged care sector has been confirmed by the Royal Commission into Aged Care. The report identified in 2016 that staff shortages in both residential aged care and across community care, with almost half of the home care providers reporting high turnover and of skilled staff. The report predicted that by 2050, an additional 113,000 personal care workers will be needed in the sector. This is an 83% increase from 2020. The NDIS review findings also indicated that an additional 105,000 support workers will be needed by June 2025 to cover the support needs of people with disability. Staff turnover across the sector has also been confirmed by the NDIS review findings that state that between 17 to 25% of disability workforce leaves the sector annually. The quality and availability of support workers is another issue that is very worrying, with many respondents identifying that support workers have very little knowledge and understanding of the support needs of people with spinal cord injuries and other complex disabilities. This finding is confirmed by the Royal Commission into Aged Care, which identified that 33% of consumers identified that staff in the sector were not adequately trained to work with the elderly, let alone with people with complex disability. It is also concerning that 50% of respondents identified that they'd experienced incidents where they believed that support staff acted unprofessionally while supporting them. It is important to note here that the Royal Commission into Aged Care and the NDIS reviews both identified staff shortages and the lack of skilled workers and have added recommendations that something needs to be done about this. Okay, so that's basically at the end of my report. I think, like what Susie was saying before, so the next steps for myself would be to write a policy brief around these issues. So I'm aiming to complete this by the end of July. The second step is to work out how do we start a campaign around this work and where I need input. And this is where I need input from you guys. So basically what I'm looking at is some volunteers who are going to help me work on this project with me, so that we can work together to actually set up a campaign for this. Because I think it's really important. It's an issue that that's confronted by both people in the aged care sector as well as people in the disability sector. So it's a really important topic that needs to be told as well. So we've already started, as Susie's saying before, we already started to use the outcomes of this survey in our submissions to government. However, it would be great to be able to brainstorm ideas with members to actually make this something worthwhile and something that we can actually do submissions on and use in other sectors and provide to other aged care, to provide to other advocacy agencies as well who are also concerned about these issues. So yeah, do people have any questions or do they have anything to contribute with regards to what I've just told you about the survey?
Probably
So
worth saying, Gordana, as well,
yep,
we will have the report available on the website
yes, I forgot to say
from
that.
next week,
Yep,
because there's a lot of data, right? That was
yeah,
amazing, but there was a lot of data, so you'll be able to
yeah.
read it from next week. It'll be on. We're doing a final proof. It'll be on the website next week.
Yeah, and also I'll also send a copy to you guys. So anybody that's been at this forum will get a copy of the report once it's published as well. Okay, so that's it for me. Next stage is for us to come back and go into our breakout rooms.
I jumped in pretty
Oh yeah,
quickly. Did anyone
actually you
have
did. Did
any
anybody
comments?
have?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just wanted to
thanks.
share. But did anyone have any feedback or thoughts? Anyone
Mm,
surprised?
yeah. Sorry, guys. No. All right.
It's a lot to take in. Have a look at the report that you get sent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the main issue though in the report is around the issues around staffing and the complexities around staffing, and that things need to be improved in terms of staff training, but not just in the support worker space, but also in the coordinator space, in most of the spaces around the work that
Personal
we're all
care.
doing. Yeah, personal care, that type of thing. Yeah. But anyway, we got enough information from you guys to be able to use this for our own lobbying and also for some bitch and writing and to share. So it's thank you. And I want to thank everybody who actually contributed to the report. It was really good. Cool. All right. Well, we've got a 5-minute break. And when you come back after the 5 minutes, you'll find all the people who are doing the aged care reforms will find themselves in the aged care breakup room. And all the people who are in the NDIS will just stay in this space so that we can keep recording. So in this section, we're going to talk about NDIS eligibility and access. So it says that participant funding will be determined on a needs assessment to work out how much support the person needs to live their life in the community. It will be focused on the person's significant functional impairment and needs rather than a medical diagnosis. So before, they had categories of people that could enter into the NDIS, and now they're going to do a more functional assessment to identify whether a person is eligible or not eligible. And okay, and everything will still be considered along the lines of reasonable and necessary, but not along the lines of need reasonable and necessary supports. Eligibility lists and primary and secondary diagnosis will be removed. There will be clearer rules on what funding can and can't be spent on, and the funding in the person's plan will be able to be used more flexibly rather than being restricted to specific categories of support. And what they mean by that is that they're not going to itemize things in your actual budget. So you're not going to have like a core budget or a budget that was used for capacity building. You'll be able to use your budget in whichever way you want to. There are parts of the budgets that are fixed, and we'll talk about those later. The definition of supports will be linked to the rights of people with disability under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. To decide eligibility, the type of assessments they are considering are called functional impact assessments, which cover a broad range of domains, and that includes things like cognitive, language, social, economic, I always say that wrong, social, emotional, motor, and adaptive behaviour. This tool hasn't been created yet. The idea is to co-design this tool with people with disability, but also people who actually do design these types of tools. These assessments will be completed by a person's treating professional and will be funded by government. The review states that the assessor should be an allied health practitioner or a social worker with disability expertise who would be employed or contracted by the NDIA. There is also an intention to simplify access requests and supporting evidence forms with guides on how to use those and how to apply. Participants will be given longer plans and the duration will be up to 5 years. So what that means, like if you've got a stable disability, which most of you would be considered as having a stable disability, you won't have to provide new evidence every year or every 12 months like they've been doing. You're going to have a plan that's set for the next 5 years, and you decide whether you need to go back to the NDIA and actually review that plan. So I think some of that stuff is actually quite good. Okay, this section is about changes to assessment and planning and what this will look like. So a support needs assessment will be completed by the allied health professional with disability expertise. They will be employed and contracted by NDIA. This assessment will decide your funding budget, and that's to be completed over a longer period of time. And if you need supported decision making, that will be also available to you. The assessor will gather the evidence from the participant treating professionals if required, and conduct a review of the participant's existing information that's already on file, and consider the participant's life circumstances. NDIA will pay for professional assessments and reports if more information is needed. Budget plans will be set on a whole of person level rather than individual support items. Flexible budgets will mean that you will be able to use your budget flexibly across the plan period. And the plan period, if it's 5 years, what they'll do is they'll keep rolling over your budget from 1 year to the next, unless you actually instigate a change or unless your circumstances change, that type of thing. Housing and living budget and status supports like high cost assistive technology and capital will not be flexible, and they'll still be part of your budget, but they'll be considered as set items, like stated, what they call stated items, which means that you can't deviate or you can't use that money for anything else except for the item that you said that you were going to use it on. Okay, so this section is about navigation. So navigation supports in and outside the NDIS. One of the most significant changes proposed is the recommendations to replace support coordinators, local area coordinators, and psychological recovery coaches with navigator roles. The panel recommended a connected system that included mainstream, foundational, and individual supports through the NDIS for people. The purpose of the navigator roles will be to support all people under 65 and their families, whether they are in the NDIS or they're not in the NDIS. So that's people outside of the system, because not everybody with a disability can access the NDIS. But what's been happening is that those people don't really get those social work supports and things like that that they need to be able to access other services. Navigators should have good local area knowledge and be able to support people with disability and their families to understand, find and use the NDIS, mainstream services, community services and foundational supports. These roles will be provided in local communities with a nationally consistent framework by people who have good local knowledge and connections with their communities. Navigators will be funded outside of your individual budgets. Help from navigators would also be available when people need them and as people's circumstances change. They will also support participants to use their NDIS funding and will have regular check-ins with them. So that's something different to what you're probably getting now, even with your support coordinators, is that check-in process. So that's really good. The navigator roles will include, so they'll have these general navigator roles who provide information, help people find and use mainstream services, foundational supports, NDIS services, as well as helping people connect with support for decision making. So specialist supports will provide similar activities to the generalist navigator, but they'll have more expertise and time to respond to specific participant groups, those with more complex needs and things like that. So I'm assuming even with SCIA that our support planners will roll into these specialist roles as well. Psychosocial recovery navigators will support people with psychosocial disability. Their role will be to do active outreach and assistance to connect with non-NDIS mainstream services and community services. The people under the NDIS, for people under the NDIS, they're therefore to support them to do application processes and to connect with mental health, to connect with primary care and housing services. Now, we spoke about these last time a little bit. So these are housing and living navigators. So they'll support participants with housing and living budgets and to trial out housing options. I think these are set in place for people who live in group homes to be able to sit with them and actually support them to be able to get have a choice in the type of housing that people can get. Shared support facilitators. So these are people that are already living in group homes. So these people are going to come in. They're external from the provider. They're external from the people that people rent the housing from, and they're especially to support people living in those group homes and in group situations. They will support people to share home settings on how they can utilize their supports better together. So remember before they were talking about how you can share your supports if you have this type of living arrangement. Well, these navigators are there to help people make decisions on how those supports can be shared and what they should be shared for. Okay, and then there's the lead practitioners, which is a specialist role for children and families. They will be there to identify needs, connect children and families to appropriate foundational and mainstream supports, and provide information, advice, and coaching to support children's development. So that's basically those three elements together. So I think the biggest concerns like we have with the navigator roles and what people are concerned in the community at the moment is that they're going to use their current support planner and also lose their support coordinators and their LACs and people like that. What I do know about this position and what's been stated is a lot of the current roles that, like the LAC roles and the support coordinator roles, will be rolled into these positions. So there'll be like a rollover of these services, at least for the time being. And then at some point, my understanding is that they'll have to apply. Once again, the issue of retention and attraction of staff in this sector is an issue. If you think about it, like what they're talking about here is it's literally going to triple the service delivery that they're doing now in terms of the support that they're providing people with disability. So we're talking about quite a lot of people that are going to have to fit into this space. Not only the people that are currently working in support coordinator roles and in the LACs, but they'll need more people because there's so many more people that are out there in the community who don't receive supports from the NDIS. The other issue is that this will only work if these foundational supports are available. So from what we know, it's going to take them about 2 years to establish foundational supports in the community. So what we're concerned about is that if it's great to have these navigator roles, but if there's no services to actually, send people to, what does this mean in the long run? So we just don't want something like this to fall over because, there's two things happening at the same time and there's not enough service out there in the sector. Okay. So the other thing you've got to remember at this stage, it's important to remember that these are just still recommendations from the NDIS review findings. The panel strongly recommended that people with disability, their families and carer and representative advocacy work closely with the government agencies to design and test these changes before to make sure that they work. And it was also recommended that these changes would take about 5 years to actually implement as well. So there's another opportunity for us to have a chat. Like I've given you a lot of information. So do people have concerns about these roles or anything along those lines? Carlos is also keeping an eye on the chat function. So if people want to write stuff, can you please write things as well? Anybody? Tanya.
Yes. How you going?
Yes.
Just on that first point about eligibility, functional impairment and needs, with existing participants, would that be grandfathered at all?
I think they're going to use the information that you've currently got in there. You guys are all rolling over into the NDIS. Like that's a given. That does, what that means into the future, I don't know. Whether people are going to have to be reassessed, I think at some point they will. But at this stage, you will just roll over with what you got, and they're going to use the information that they already have on you. You guys have been providing information from them probably every year to prove that you've got a disability. So, I think they've got enough information to start with, and the beauty of going forward is that they will pay for any other types of assessments as well, which is fantastic.
Thanks.
Okay, anybody else? Did you find the information useful? Because it's good for me to get feedback as well. Cool.
Any information is useful.
Okay. There's plenty of it to be handed over. I was thinking of doing one on supported decision making as well, because I think it's an interesting topic.
I think what's been difficult is because so many organisations are trying to tap into it and everything like that.
Yeah.
Like I know myself, I've been trying to submit submissions to every single one of them.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is just trying to keep a handle on, you know, all the forums and all the workshops and everything that's going on at the moment. So.
But the other thing that you could do for us, and I'll go through this a little bit later, is send us information. Like if you've got concerns about anything, please write to us. Because sometimes even when we read the stuff, like you know, the way I've read that to you, it sounds really positive. But in respects, it probably isn't when you go down to the finer details. And when they start unpacking it like they have in the bill, and then you realize, oh, they're going to be really prescriptive here. They're going to be doing this here. So it's really important that you guys communicate. And if you don't want to do a submission yourself, then send us your information and we'll use that in our submissions. So that's another way of getting stuff in. Okay. Well, John?
Yes, hi. Sorry, I can't get my video working, but
You're right, John.
I can only get the back of the camera working. So my main concern at this stage would be the timeframes. Coincidentally, my local area coordinator sent me an email today to say this is her last day on the job, and she's going to be handing over to another local area coordinator in the next couple of weeks or so. So she's sort of offline now. So a little bit concerned that it was just last minute. There was no last minute discussion that this was coming. Was that local area coordinator, was that part of this change that we're doing at the moment?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to take them, like they said, it's going to take them at least 5 years. I think from what I read somewhere that people won't be reassessed until 2 years into this. So, you know, they're going to basically roll everybody over with what they've got now. I don't know, like you said, you know, when they do reassess, the issue is going to be, and we're going to talk about it in the next part when we do the bill, is when they look at what's in and what's out of the NDIS. So I think when you get reassessed after 2 years, that's when those issues might come up for you. But that doesn't mean that, you know, the idea of what's out will mean that some other government agency is doing that role. There is one more person who's got their hand. John.
Yeah, sorry. I just didn't finish as well. With regards to the time frame, 5 years is a long time to get this in. And in my previous role, I was in a development team, and we used to come up with decisions, and this is what we're going to do, and we would try them out and individually pretend you're a user and see how it goes. And this exact feedback, I'm new to NDIS, and I went through the process recently, and my feedback, I had some immense feedback that went back to them. The whole thing was wrong. Me trying to get onto NDIS was very, very complex, right to the stage of a 50-page application form where you fill it in and it's all NDIS writing, and you're writing a little bit, a couple of lines to it, and you print it all off, and you send it all in, and it's too big a file, and it won't go into NDIS. Right? So someone has to sit down and run through the process and see what actually happens. What's the end user experiencing when you go through this before making it formal and making it legal? And that's the way it's going to happen in the future. So that's really the two main concerns. That NDIS has been around for a long time, and I was really surprised at the fact that I ended up having to print it off. And I printed it off in black and white first, and then I sent it in as well, and that didn't work either. So I actually had to go to an office and hand it in by myself.
Yes, that access stuff is one of the things that came up in in both of the reviews. Just, you know, the Royal Commission review as well as the NDIS review. that people were having huge amounts of problems accessing. Some of these navigator roles are actually there to provide that type of support. So hopefully, you know, in the future, things will look better. And as far as, you know, they've been promising us that they're going to meet with us and that they're going to, you know, test out this stuff, that it's not just going to go ahead and whatever. So I'm hoping that they stick to their word. At least Bill Shorten, while he's alive, he said he would. so, so let's
Fingers
just
crossed.
yeah, let's just keep our fingers crossed, and when you get opportunities to participate, please do so. Like that information that I sent around the bill is really good, because I've actually provided a 2-pager of how you can put in a submission and what you need to kind of consider. And it's actually quite good. When I went through it, I went, wow, this is really good. It helped me as well, because I don't have a lot of experience writing submissions. That's why I'm doing the representative advocacy bit. But my boss, she's got great skills in that. So we're putting up every submission that we can. We've been trying to put it up on behalf of you guys. But yeah, like I said, getting information from you and getting words from your like your own testimonials, that's what's really important to us, because it's actually hearing the person with the disability that has the impact on these agencies. You know, I'm sure they were shocked even when they got the review as well, because some of that stuff was quite negative towards the agency. So thank you. I am going to, now we're going to move on. If everybody, is anybody else, sorry, I'm not very good with the question stuff, am I? Does anybody else want to ask anything else? All right, well, let's move on. This one's going to be a little bit more wordy than this one, because this is about the bill that's just come up. So, on the 24th of March this year, Minister Shorten announced that the new NDIS legislation was tabled in Parliament to implement priority recommendations from the NDIS review findings. The bill is named the National Disability Insurance Scheme Amendment, Getting the NDIS Back on Track, number 1, Bill 2024. And the reason why I put the emphasis on number 1 is this is not the only one that's going to come through. So there's going to be, as things roll out and as things change, as the consultations happen, this bill will start getting bigger and bigger. But this is the first part of it. And, you know, when we were saying before, you know, the timing, this is fast. This is actually very fast, like to get something like this up and get it before Parliament. In his speech to Parliament, Minister Shorten listed the principles that will guide the changes. Their intent is to make the NDIS better and more streamlined by improving participant experience in areas as access, plans, budget setting, quality, and safety. Moving the NDIS back into its original intention of supporting people with significant and permanent disability, creating more equity and protecting people's rights, ensuring the sustainability of the scheme. Now, Mr. Shorten emphasised that the federal government's position is that the NDIS cannot keep growing at the level that it's growing now, and to strengthen the powers of the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission to protect participants from illegal and unethical conduct. The bill represents the first tranche of recommendations to the National Disability Insurance Scheme Act of 2013. So it's actually building on the previous act and also making changes to the previous act. Minister Shorten promised that following the successful passage of legislation, the government intends to engage in a co-design and consultation process with people with disability, their families, their carers, representative organisations like SCIA, service providers, unions, and the broader community. This co-design and consultation process will inform the government on their decision-making on the various reforms and help to make the updated NDIS rules and legislative instruments. This is important because the impact on participants will come from the content of these rules and these instruments. So it will be essential that they are developed in close consultation with people with disabilities. So at the moment, the Senate committee is doing an inquiry. So they're taking submissions on the bill until the 17th of May. So we've actually started developing our own submissions to the committee on behalf of our members. And you too can also raise concerns by submitting your own submission to the committee. I've already sent information out to people on this, but I will resend it as well so that you guys know, and I will send a little bit of a snippet of the recommendations that we're putting forward as well, so that you've got information that you can write back on as well. So we've identified some good amendments in the bill, and these include the whole of person flexible budgets, giving participants choice and control to identify and pay for the supports they need. Stated supports will not be flexible, like I said before. So these are the things that are high cost assistive technology, home modifications, and supported living. Longer participant plans that should reduce the need to explain supports in circumstances that are unchanged, up to 5 years with reviews when circumstances change. Payment of additional reports requested by the NDIS will provide a removal of financial barriers, which should improve access to the NDIS. But in everything that's good in the report, there's quite a few negative things as well. And like Susie said, it was actually really hard to read the bill as well. And I found that I'm hoping that that will improve as this unfolds. We've also identified amendments that require more detail and significant redesign. These include the definition of an NDIS support. We are concerned that the term reasonable and necessary supports is being removed. So they're going to call them reasonable and necessary budgets. So they're removing the word supports out of that from the Act, and is being replaced with a more prescriptive list of NDIS supports. Remember before I was telling you they're going to actually have consultation on what's in and what's out, that kind of thing. We believe that this will limit those in the community who rely on broad and difficult to define assistive technology for activities of daily living. We stated that it is critical that there is sufficient flexibility within the definition of what an NDIS support is, and that the addition of a prescriptive category list does not impede the stated goal of choice and control that now currently underpins the NDIS. Because now if you put something, if they refuse something, you can actually go and appeal it. Once it goes into an instrument, like a legal instrument, like a bill or an act, then it's a little bit more difficult to actually do that. People with disability, their families and carers and representative organisations are engaged to determine what is and what is not an NDIS support. So we're hoping that they will actually come to specific disability groups as well, because it's really important, because the same support for one particular group is different to the support needs of another particular group. But inside that group of people, like say you have people with spinal cord injuries, the support needs are very different for each individual as well. So there's quite a lot of complexity involved with making those types of decisions of what you can have and what you can't have in terms of support. We also asked that the NDIS continue to use the term reasonable and necessary supports until the NDIS rules and co-design are agreed upon. Mr. Shorten stated that until the rules are written, the NDIS will use the applied principles and tables of support to decide what will be funded by the NDIS and what will be left for the state and territory governments to provide. We have a little bit of concern about that, because those applied lists are actually quite limited. So if you want something that's a little bit outside the square, it can become a bit of a problem. So what we're recommending is that they keep reasonable necessary there until they come up with the rules, because they've told us it's going to take them about 2 years to actually do all the consultations with the different disability groups to actually come up with the rules and the legislative framework. So the next one is about support outside the system. We agree with the proposal for a new framework plans and the budget framework to be developed alongside foundational supports outside the NDIS could be effective, but only if such supports are in place before the NDIS changes are made. So we know at this stage that many services outside of the NDIS simply don't exist. Many people, particularly in rural and remote Australia, are likely to be left without access to any supports because of this change if foundational supports are not implemented side by side with the new NDIS supports. SCIA's stance on this issue is supported by a recent submission into the NDIS by DANA, which is the Disability Advocacy Network Australia, who actually commissioned a regional and who actually commissioned a report on the NDIS participant experience in regional and remote Australia. Okay, and what they found that in many parts of rural, remote and regional Australia, there is less choice for service provision and in some areas no critical services at all. The other issue that has a huge impact on establishing supports outside the NDIS is the staff shortages across the sector. This is supported by our service provider survey, which identified staff shortages in both aged care and the disability sector. We recommended that the agencies work together with people with disability, their families, carers, representative organisations to determine the funding breakdown of supports before the new reasonable and necessary budgets of the NDIS are rolled out, and that strategies are put in place to address workforce shortages in all markets in the sector, especially those thin markets in those rural and regional areas. Okay. There's only two more that I have to cover. So requirements and conditions. We ask for greater clarification in section 32H, and this is around alternative commissioning and preferred support models. So what they said that they'll do, so in areas like rural and remote areas, they're going to actually commission services in those areas, or it might be, say, an Aboriginal community in the outback. So they would be looking at commissioning something that's on a local level, or they'd be looking at commissioning certain supports for groups of people with disability, that type of thing. Okay, so whilst we see some positive implications of this amendment, particularly related to alternative commissioning that allows First Nations people to receive supports from First Nation providers, however, we see potential risk arising for people with permanent, complex and costly disabilities in case where requirements could be set by people with insufficient expertise to know what specified conditions represent best practice for a class of participants for individual participants. So this is going back to that idea that you have a class of participants that might need certain supports, but when you actually narrow it down, each individual person may need different supports. Okay. So, okay. We recommended the Act must include specific detail that protects the rights of people to make informed decisions regarding their supports and to provide protection to prevent restrictions in preferred support models. So to actually not place too many restrictions on those support models, because individuals within that particular group of participants may need alternate supports to what you've actually got in that support model. The need for assessment process. There is an assumption in the Act that there should be a more prescribed categories, including NDIS supports and classes of participants. So that's a group of people with disability that make it simpler to determine the supports required by people with disability while removing inconsistencies. While we support the removal of inconsistencies between people with similar disabilities, we have significant concerns that about the role and the training of people making these decisions. We believe that training is imperative for anyone making decisions about the support needs of people with complex disability. We know that there are significant variables and complexities within a single disability category that may lead to people requiring different supports in that category. We gave the example of a person with quadriplegia who may be able to transfer and independently mobilise, while someone in a similar class of participant may require a two-person transfer or a breathing and ventilation assistance. And this is supported by the fact that SCIA members regularly report that their plans are not accepted due to the lack of knowledge about the complexity of their disability, even regarding basic needs such as dressings and nursing for pressure sore, requiring them to seek a review of their plan. And this is what's happening currently. So if they put even more restrictions on that, that's going to be an issue. We believe the role of the person completing the assessment is critical in the provision of suitable supports. SCIA members are concerned that if the person conducting the assessment has insufficient understanding about their required specialist supports, the inconsistencies that the Act Our recommendation to the committee is that the role of the assessor be included in the Act, and that a comprehensive co-design process is required for classes of participants who have complex disability to ensure that the person conducting the needs assessment is sufficiently trained and understands the support needs. So basically, we're asking for consultation on this particular element so that we can identify what the needs are in that particular class of participants, so that that can then be used to train people who are actually going to be doing these assessments in the future. And the last one is about monitoring compliance. So this is section 38 of the Act of the bill, and this states that the information about the functional capacity of a participant can be requested. We believe that this needs to be managed sensitively, and as outlined above, assessors need to be appropriately trained to understand the complexities of cases or of a particular person's individual disability. We recommend that the NDIA staff be consistently trained on and audited to understand the requirements of the functional assessments. So not only are the people that are actually helping you do the assessment need to be trained, but also the NDIA staff who are making the final decision about whether you get that budget or not. We also recommend that administration requirements be minimal and should involve supported decision-making where required. So that's it for so that's basically what we've written in our submissions so far. So what we're saying is we agreed with some of the parts of the Act, and that's around the budget flexibility, the longer plan times, and we think that they're very positive steps in the right direction. However, what we're concerned about is the structure of legislation that sets rigid perimeters around NDIS supports and builds a system of those supports that could ultimately make access to the NDIS for people with permanent, complex and costly disabilities less person-centred. So, yes. So, so as stated earlier, we have started this submission, and they're the things that we've basically put in the submission. So I will share that with you guys after, just to get more feedback from you. So it's due on the 17th of May. So if you've got further input, or you don't think we've represented everything that's a worry for you, please come back to us at that representative email address. Yeah, the other thing that we need from you as part of these submissions, a lot of you have told us in the past that you get like odd bits of assistive technology, supports, unusual services, and services that you've had to fight for in the past, because we want to use those as examples in that section of the submission. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send out an email link for you to a platform where you can actually write something for me and actually send back information about things like that. I'm kind of thinking about things that I think, Tanya, you said something in the past where you said, like, you know, I could go down to Aldi and get some personal care stuff that you needed and pay this much for it, whereas I have to go over, you know, if this goes ahead, then I'm going to have to go here, which will cost me a lot more money for something like that. But I'm sure that people have also applied and taken the NDIS to an appeal on areas or on services and things like that that they've needed in the past. So it'd be really interesting to get your feedback on something like that. Cool. Do people have any questions around the bill itself? All right, so the thing that you need to know from me is basically I will send out an email to you guys in the next week. Okay, Sarah Jane, sorry.
Thank you, Gordana. I have a question. You may have answered it and I missed it, but the concept of the providers that aren't NDIS registered.
Yep.
That you contract and they're doing whatever for you. Am I hearing that they are going to need to be registered? Is that what the proposal is?
That's what the proposal is, that every provider
for them to do that.
Sorry?
What's the process for them to do that? I think
this is where it gets a little bit hairy for me anyway. So if you're using, say you're employing your own staff and you're using that person to provide personal care for you, that would be considered at one of the higher categories of registration, because there are things like personal care, like bowel care, those types of things would be considered high. And then you've got other people that provide lawn mowing and those types of activities, like your supermarkets where you can buy goods and services. They would be the ones that would just have to enrol. What that looks like at the moment, we don't actually know because they haven't released any information on that. But definitely there'll be some kind of, there's 4 categories of enrolment, depending on the type of work that the support workers do or the agency provides. Yeah.
Yeah, it could become quite complex, I'm thinking.
Yeah, it could, but I'm kind of thinking that the platform providers themselves will probably get on board with this anyway, because do you know what I mean? Like they're recommending people to work with people, and they're ultimately responsible at the end of the day. So yeah, so I'm kind of thinking that. I think where it has the biggest impact are people who are employing people themselves, or people who are employing people from non-English speaking backgrounds who are going to find it really difficult to register for these types of platforms. They haven't said what type of support that they were going to give providers. I know that they will be providing training and for providers themselves on what this should look like. I mean, the system at the moment, if you are registered, you do have to respond to I think it's every year that you have to provide a report back to them. Well, I'm not even sure. Just ignore that because I'm not 100% sure how often they have to respond back. But they do have to respond and actually tell people what they're doing and what their policies and procedures are like and that type of thing, and why they should be doing the care that they are doing. And also making sure that their support workers are trained to work with people with complex support needs.
John here. I'd agree.
Yeah, go, John.
The complex things, absolutely, they should be trained and everything should be right. But when it comes to things like the lawn mowing and the cleaning thing, as long as they've got an ABN number and you're happy with the support they're giving, I don't think it's good to go, because I've tried to find a cleaner before, and with the cleaners, we weren't satisfied with the quality that was being done. And we found someone who's just got an ABN number. They do everything okay, and I think that's it should be segmented. That if it's a normal type thing, just an ABN is sufficient. If it's the complex and, as you said, bowels and cleaning and all that sort of stuff, they should actually definitely be trained. And,
I was really surprised, John, as well, how many unregistered providers they were using in the NDIS as well. I mean, the number's huge, like 160,000 or something. Like, it's quite big. Actually, there's more unregistered than registered. So, I think, look, there's the basic. I think for the enrolment, I mean, what they're looking for is they're going to be asking people. So if somebody's coming to your home, for example, to provide a service, they're going to have a police check or an NDIS check at the minimum and that type of thing. Anyway, so so I think a lot of people will start doing that anyway, because I think it's in their best interest too. But it's when it gets to that personal care level that the registration starts becoming very complex. And that's one of the things that we're worried about, is that people who are employing their own staff at the moment will have to either ask one of the platform providers to take over that support, or basically not have that support worker working for them anymore. Sarah Jane.
Thanks. So we're talking about the NDIA will be providing a training kind of program for the complex care needs. Is that what I'm hearing?
Sorry, say that again.
There'll be like modules for training for complex care needs that will be put in place by the NDIS?
I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. It's something that should be in place from your provider. Like, I mean, it goes across many elements. So obviously TAFE is involved, because you got the certificate for training and that type of thing, and what that looks like. I remember a few years back when I was still working in the sector, we were kind of talking to TAFE about the possibility of doing external modules, say, to cover people at that point in time, we were talking about people with an acquired brain injury and also people with early onset dementia, to say if they had modules that people could choose if they were working in say dementia or something like that, then they could choose a module, or if they're doing bowel care, that they could choose a module to do that type of thing. You know, service providers are supposed to be providing the training for their staff. That's what their role is. And then if you employ your own staff, you're obviously providing that training to your staff.
And I guess that will be my question. Will that constitute the training? If they need to be registered and they need to have had training, you know, I've trained them for my needs, and that, you know, what will that look like?
The problem is it won't be enough. Because it's the complexity of the care. So you always have to, I think with this bill stuff, you always have to take it back to who's going to sue who kind of thing. And, you know, when it gets to the point where you're working at the pointy end, which is what a lot of your care is, it's at that really complex end of care support where you're doing intrusive stuff. And it's that kind of thing, you know. At the moment, you know, our support workers have their own insurance and stuff like that, but what does that look like into the future? The NDIS wants everybody registered. They want to know who's working with whom out there. But, you know, we have raised this as an issue and we have put it up to that task force. We will be putting it up again because it is an issue for a lot of our clients who are employing their own staff. I don't know, Carlos, did you have a look in the chat?
Yeah, so Ali was mentioning about same thing, that she trains her own stuff, but as we said, Ali still have to be registered, and then they have generic knowledge of the task, and then you can train them specifically to your needs. But somebody who is going to come to your house, to your home, is going to have to have a minimum, or at least be registered, so they know who is coming to your house, and they will have to have minimum skills and knowledge about what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then you're more than happy to train them after to your specific needs.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think it'll be really interesting. It'll be interesting to see who they consider should be enrolled and who should be registered. And like we said, there's different levels of registration. What we don't know at the moment is what the requirement is. And that's where the safeguards and committees, whatever they're called, the commission is working on that. And they did also say that they would involve people with disability in that consultation work as well. So, and of course, there's a task force. There's the registration task force, and they're taking submissions at the moment as well. So that's due on the 28th. SCIA is putting up a submission. We've also did the work with Dana as well, and we've given that information to them. I wrote a letter to them identifying the issues and the concerns. And they've actually asked us to launch their submission in a panel as well. So that was good. So that was quite interesting. Okay, well, that's it for me. So thank you very much for listening to me. I know it's a bit dry, and I always find it hard to know, you know, how much information I should give and how much time we should spend talking and that type of thing. But I think if you do have any concerns, just write an email, and like we can actually, you know, send you to. There's a lot of fact sheets on the NDIS website that explain a lot of the changes that they're proposing as well. So, you know, we can link you to those. So just write to me because I've got information on all of that.
Jordana, Ali mentioned something else in the chat.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to read it?
Yeah, I'll read it for you. So Ali mentioned that everybody's okay with the shift notes that will have to be written if you receive high level care from a registered provider.
Yes.
So I don't know how we could respond to that.
Yeah, I actually don't know. That's a good question. So question on notice for that one.
Well, in regards to privacy, there's like the confidentiality agreement that will have to stand, and those notes, as just so you know, those notes are keeping between you, the person who writes them, and then if they want to disclose those, they'll have to give a reason to disclose those.
Yeah, and
So
I think, Ali, what you're talking about is between your support workers. Is that correct? Yeah. So it's actually, yeah, having the confidentiality at the moment, you know, people probably only sharing information that they need to share rather than information that they don't need to share. I think, well, look, it will be interesting to see what type of resources the NDIS produces for people as well, to see how they can manage this type of thing. I think that whole area, it's kind of, it is kind of scary. I mean, you know, you guys have spent 10 years cultivating this space for your own carers, and some of you have carers that have been with you for a very long time. And then something like this comes up and you're kind of going, oh my goodness, like I feel like we haven't actually been listened to. And like out of all the positive stuff, I mean, even when you look at all complaints, most of them are from private service providers that are already registered. It's very rarely that you hear something from somebody who's actually hired their own staff and that type of thing. Okay. Anybody else? But look, if you do have any concerns, just come back to us and we'll respond to you. Happy to do that. At the moment, I think, you know, once we do these consultations as well, I think that will be a good thing, and that will help help us, I think, help all of us to actually take that next step of going forward with this as well.